In the opening months of 1942, as the Pacific War expanded with a ferocity few American commanders had anticipated, the Solomon Islands became a shadowed battleground where information was as valuable as ammunition. Amid the shifting tides of the Guadalcanal campaign, one of the least discussed yet most unsettling incidents involved a 6-man Marine reconnaissance patrol on Tulagi, an island small in size but immense in strategic importance. Their disappearance, abrupt and unexplained, remains one of the earliest and most chilling mysteries of marine operations in the Solomons. The story begins in August 1942, just days after the Marines had secured Tulagi from its first Japanese defenders. The island's terrain, a dense labyrinth of mangroves, limestone ridges, and narrow coastal tracts, hid pockets of enemy stragglers who refused to surrender. A Marine officer from the 1st Raider Battalion recorded in his field journal, "Tulagi is quiet but not silent. You can feel the enemy breathing somewhere in the trees." Command needed updated intelligence on lingering Japanese movement along the northern shore, and so a small reconnaissance team was assembled, 6 men experienced in jungle patrols, armed with Springfield rifles, a Thompson submachine gun, and one fragile but vital SR 536 handy-talkie radio. The patrol departed at dusk on August 12. Their objective was straightforward: follow the coastal curve, document any signs of enemy resupply by small craft, and report back before dawn. At the time, American intelligence suspected Japanese barges still attempted to retrieve stranded personnel. The Marines were instructed to avoid direct engagement, to observe and withdraw. Nothing in the mission brief suggested unusual risk. Tulagi was considered largely secure. But everything changed 3 hours after their departure. At 21:47, the Raiders command post received a short transmission: "Movement offshore, possible boat, checking, stand by." The message was clear, calm, and professional. It was followed by silence. Operators waited. Minutes passed. Then the final transmission came through, fragmented, heavily static-laden, and disturbingly abrupt. "Lights closing in fast, unknown," it ended mid-word. No further communication was ever received. At first, officers assumed radio malfunction. The SR 536 was notorious for unreliable range in jungle environments. But when the patrol missed their scheduled check-in and failed to return by sunrise, concern turned into organized alarm. A search party of Raiders and Navy personnel was dispatched along the northern coastline. They found the patrol's initial landing site marked with boot impressions, and then nothing. No bullet casings, no torn foliage, no signs of struggle. One Raider sergeant later recounted, "It was as though they stepped off the sand and walked into vapor." Historical context deepens the mystery. Japanese naval records from early August note several attempts to extract stranded sailors from Tulagi's reefs using collapsible boats launched from destroyers offshore. Some scholars believe the missing Marines may have stumbled upon such an extraction and been swiftly overpowered. Yet Japanese testimonies collected after the war contain no reference to captured Marines from Tulagi in 1942. That absence is its own troubling clue. Adding complexity to the case were local reports from Solomon Islanders interviewed months later. A scout working with the Coast Watchers recalled hearing engine sputters near the northern beach the same night of the disappearance, followed by what he described as shouts in a language not English, and then nothing but the surf again. The scout could not determine whether the voices were Japanese or American. His account, though uncertain, was the only eyewitness clue. Investigators also considered environmental factors. Tulagi's limestone pits and coastal caves were notorious for swallowing the unwary, and some officers speculated the patrol might have fallen into an unseen cavern while maneuvering at night. But skeptics countered that experienced Marines with flashlights would not all vanish without leaving equipment behind. Furthermore, the terrain near the patrol's last known location lacked the deep sinkholes common elsewhere on the island. One particularly haunting discovery emerged during the 3rd day of searching: a pair of fresh footprints leading into a shallow mangrove pool, but none leading out. The prints matched Marine issue boots, yet the depth and spacing suggested a single individual, not the entire team. A cryptic notation in an after-action report reads simply, "Unclear origin. Could be unrelated." The line raises more questions than it answers. What remains indisputable is this: the 6-man patrol was never found, no bodies, no weapons, and no further radio signals. Their disappearance prompted command to revise reconnaissance protocols, requiring larger patrol sizes and scheduled coded check-ins even during short-range missions. Their case became quiet lore among Marines rotating through the Solomons, a reminder that even secured islands could conceal hostile shadows. Today, historians still debate the most likely explanation. Enemy capture? Nighttime ambush by isolated Japanese survivors? A disorienting misstep into unforgiving terrain? None fully account for the lack of physical evidence. The war moved on, the files closed. Yet the mystery of Tulagi set the stage for future disappearances in the Solomon Islands, each more complex, more unnerving, and more difficult to resolve. And as the Guadalcanal campaign intensified, the fog of war darkened further. The second missing patrol would occur just months later, along a river whose name still echoes through marine history, the Matanacaw. By late 1942, the Guadalcanal campaign had entered its most chaotic and punishing phase. While headlines often focus on the naval clashes that raged offshore, some of the most perilous battles occurred in places few outsiders could pronounce: dense jungles, shadowed valleys, and narrow river corridors where visibility collapsed into a green haze. One such location was the Matanacaw River, a place where Marines fought bitterly for months. It was here, in October 1942, that a Marine Raider Scout patrol vanished in circumstances that still trouble historians and veterans alike. The Matanacaw was more than a geographical barrier, it was a tactical fault line. Japanese forces used the river's brush-choked ravines as natural concealment for supply caches, sniper hides, and infiltration routes aimed at threatening Henderson Field. American commanders desperately needed to understand enemy movement along its western banks. And so, on the damp evening of October 24th, a small, highly trained Raider Scout team was sent to gather intelligence. They were seasoned men, 4 scouts and 1 communications Marine, pulled from the 2nd Raider Battalion. Their mission: chart any new Japanese positions and return by dawn. They carried minimal equipment: M1 carbines, a Thompson submachine gun, a Landsat compass, and an SCR 300 radio. Around them, the sounds of the jungle blended with distant artillery bursts. As one Marine later recalled, the Matanacaw at night wasn't quiet. It was like the island held its breath, waiting to see who would move first. The scouts slipped into the undergrowth and were soon swallowed by the darkness. Initially, their progress was routine. At 2100 hours, they radioed a brief update confirming movement along the river's upper bend, likely a small Japanese unit repositioning. Their tone was calm, measured, the voice of experienced reconnaissance Marines. Then, near midnight, the radio operator at the Raider Command Post received a final, strained transmission: "Contact, something in the ravine, maybe more." Static consumed the rest. Minutes passed. Then an hour. No further messages. When the patrol failed to return by dawn, Lieutenant Colonel Evans Carlson, one of the pioneering leaders of Marine Raider operations, authorized an immediate search. The response was swift, involving a company-strength force sweeping both sides of the river. The terrain they confronted was punishing: vine tangles, chest-deep mud pockets, and narrow ravines where sound echoed unpredictably. But it was in one such ravine that searchers made their first and only discoveries. There, at the edge of a steep, fern-lined drop, lay a damaged Landsat compass, its casing cracked as though smashed against stone. A few feet farther, a torn strap from a canteen dangled from a root. Beyond that, nothing. No signs of struggle, no blood, no footprints leading away. The ground was oddly undisturbed, as if the patrol had simply dissolved into the shadows. An after-action report recorded that the ravine was unsuitable for an ambush by larger forces, and yet the evidence suggested abrupt separation from their equipment. One Raider sergeant wrote with frustration, "They were here. We can prove that much. But beyond that, the trail goes cold in a way that doesn't make sense." Local Solomon Islanders later provided testimonies that added layers of confusion rather than clarity. A pair of scouts assisting the Coast Watcher network claimed to have heard rapid gunfire in the dark, along the river around the time the patrol disappeared. Yet Japanese diaries recovered after the battle make no mention of a firefight in that area on the night of October 24th. One Japanese corporal wrote only that his unit avoided the ravines that night due to fear of American artillery. Other theories emerged. Some Marines believed the patrol stumbled into a hidden Japanese sniper nest and was taken down quickly and quietly before they could escape. Others speculated the men might have fallen victim to the unpredictable terrain, disoriented, separated, and overwhelmed in darkness. More ominous possibilities involved isolated Japanese holdouts capturing the patrol, but post-war prisoner records provided no such confirmation. One of the most puzzling details came from the radio logs. The final transmission contained faint background noise, what sounded to experienced operators like water moving over rock. Analysts concluded the patrol must have approached the river's narrower upstream sections. But searches in that area revealed no discarded gear, no footprints, no drag marks. The river, calm and shallow that night, showed no signs of sweeping anyone away. The absence of concrete evidence chilled the raider ranks. A corporal in Carlson's unit later wrote, "Men die in war. Men fall in combat. But men don't just vanish without leaving the jungle a story to tell." His sentiment was shared widely. The Matanikau had claimed many lives, but this disappearance was different. It left behind no clues that fit any single explanation. In the years after the war, historians revisiting the incident found themselves circling the same unanswered questions. How could a trained patrol vanish so close to friendly lines? Why was only a compass and strap recovered? And what had the scouts seen or heard in their final fragmented message? The mystery of the lost Matanikau patrol became part of Guadalcanal's darker legacy, a reminder that even well-documented battles contain shadows historians still struggle to penetrate. And as the campaign pushed onward across the Solomons, the stage was set for yet another disappearance, this time on the island of New Georgia, where the jungle seemed to twist into a maze with no exit. By mid-1943, the fighting in the Solomon Islands had shifted northwest toward New Georgia, a place where the jungle grew so dense it seemed to swallow entire battalions whole. For the Marines and soldiers pushing through the island chain, New Georgia represented a new kind of battlefield, humid, lightless, and labyrinthine. It was here, near the contested harbor of Bairoko, that a four-man Marine Pathfinder team disappeared without a trace, leaving behind one of the most unnerving mysteries of the entire Pacific campaign. The incident took place on July 17, 1943, during the New Georgia offensive led jointly by U.S. Army and Marine Raider units. Allied forces were attempting to isolate the Japanese stronghold at Munda Point by cutting through the jungle and seizing Bairoko Harbor, a key resupply waypoint for enemy reinforcements. But the push toward Bairoko quickly turned into a nightmare. Japanese defenders entrenched themselves along steep ridges and interconnected ravines, making every advance costly. Units frequently lost contact with one another. Maps proved inaccurate. Compasses misbehaved under the iron-rich soil. Even experienced scouts found themselves disoriented by the island's twisting foliage. Within this chaos, the 1st Marine Raider Regiment required a Pathfinder team to secure a narrow inlet north of Bairoko. Their mission was to mark a landing point for reinforcements arriving at dawn. The 148th Infantry Regiment, scheduled to move inland and support the Raider assault. The team consisted of 4 Marines, Corporal James "Mac" McAllister, Private First Class Leon Ortiz, Private Samuel Cooper, and Radioman Private Harold Stenwick. All had previous reconnaissance experience on Guadalcanal, making them ideal candidates for a stealth insertion. They departed after midnight aboard a small motor launch, carrying nothing more than their weapons, a signal lamp, several marker panels, and an SEER 536 radio. The distance they needed to travel was short, just over 1,200 yards, but the coastline was hostile, broken by coral shelves and mangrove pockets where Japanese patrols sometimes hid. The boat delivered them just off the inlet at 1:50. 5 minutes later, the launch crew heard a brief radio confirmation: Pathfinder team ashore. Moving to position. It would be the last verified message the Marines ever sent. When the Pathfinder team failed to activate the prearranged landing signals at dawn, confusion spread through the Raider ranks. Initially, officers suspected equipment malfunction, a frequent problem in the dripping wet climate. But by 6:30, with no visual indicators and no radio traffic, the landing was aborted. Instead, a Raider platoon was dispatched to locate the missing team. At 7:10, the searchers found the motor launch drifting with its engine cut, just 300 yards from the original drop point. The crew had anchored and waited overnight as instructed. They reported no gunfire, no shouts, no signs of struggle. The ocean had remained unervingly calm. The search team moved inland. What they found raised more questions than answers. The beach showed faint boot impressions leading into the vegetation, but none coming back out. A few yards in, perched on a mossed-over rock, lay a single object, a signal panel still tightly folded as though dropped by accident. There were no shell casings, no broken branches, no signs of pursuit or defensive action. The team had simply walked into the green chokehold of New Georgia and vanished. As the Raiders pushed deeper, the terrain grew increasingly claustrophobic. The canopy blocked nearly all sunlight, turning the jungle floor into a dim green twilight. The air smelled of wet earth and cordite from recent clashes. A lieutenant noted in his report, visibility reduced to 5 yards in places. Men felt watched. Japanese defenders were known to occupy concealed spider holes in the area, often just feet from American patrols. Yet no such positions were discovered near the missing team's path. At noon, the raiders reached a shallow creek running parallel to the inlet. Near its bank they discovered another piece of evidence, a bent M1 carbine magazine lying half-submerged in the water. The magazine bore no scratches or dents suggesting a struggle. It looked as though it had been removed and dropped lightly or placed. But there were no footprints on the soft mud around it. Small clues kept emerging, each more perplexing than the last. A torn piece of signal lamp wiring. A cigarette packet believed to belong to PFC Ortiz. A boot print at least a day old but pointing toward, not away from, the landing zone. None of the evidence formed a coherent picture. Post-war interviews with Japanese officers provided little clarity. According to a captured intelligence officer from the 229th Infantry Regiment, no Japanese patrols operated in the inlet that night. Their attention was focused on defending ridge lines inland, not the coastline. If the Pathfinders had fallen into enemy hands, he insisted, there would have been a record, even if only a brief line in a combat log. But there was none. Historians have proposed several explanations. One possibility is that the Marines became hopelessly disoriented and moved inland rather than toward their objective, eventually succumbing to wounds, starvation, or enemy fire deep in the jungle. Another theory suggests the team encountered an isolated Japanese element and was killed quickly, their bodies lost in the undergrowth. A more controversial idea is that the Marines attempted to avoid an unexpected Japanese patrol observed from shore and became separated, each man wandering along a different vector until no traceable evidence remained. But none of these theories address the most unsettling fact. Not a single body, weapon, or piece of major equipment was ever located, not during the war, not in the decades afterward. The disappearance of the new Georgia Pathfinder team cast a shadow over the raiders preparing for their next major engagement. If 4 experienced Marines could vanish so close to friendly lines, what did that say about the terrain they now faced? The mystery would only deepen as operations shifted to Bougainville, where underground tunnel networks and shifting front lines created an even more dangerous frontier, and where the next disappearance would occur under even stranger circumstances. By early 1944, the war in the Solomon Islands had entered a new and formidable chapter. Now the focus shifted to Bougainville, a vast, mountainous island where thick jungle and an intricate maze of Japanese tunnels turned every patrol into a test of nerve and navigation. It was here, near the Numa Numa Trail, that an intelligence-gathering patrol from the 3rd Marine Division disappeared under circumstances that remain baffling to this day. Their vanishing would become one of the most whispered stories among veterans of Bougainville, a place already infamous for encounters invisible to the eye. In February 1944, the 3rd Marine Division maintained a defensive perimeter around Cape Torokina, while Japanese forces under General Harakichi Hyakutake prepared for a massive counteroffensive. American commanders needed updated intelligence about newly suspected tunnel entrances southeast of Hill 700. These tunnels, carved into volcanic rock, allowed Japanese troops to move undetected from ridge to ridge. Rumors circulated that some stretched hundreds of yards, complete subterranean highways built by hand in suffocating darkness. To investigate, Captain Marcus Wheeler selected a 5-man patrol from the division's intelligence section. They were seasoned Marines, Sergeant Alan Kramer, Corporal Joseph Red Farnell, Privates Raymond Cho and Henry Halstead, and Radioman PFC Robert Lindstrom. All had participated in earlier Bougainville patrols and understood the dangers of both terrain and enemy tactics. The men set out at dawn on February 9th. Armed with M1 rifles, a Browning automatic rifle, and a hand-cranked E8 field telephone relay pack modified for short-range radio use, they moved along a narrow spur trail leading toward suspected enemy tunnel complexes. Their assignment was to observe, not engage. If they confirmed new tunnel activity, they were to mark the coordinates and withdraw before nightfall. At 11:15, Lindstrom made a routine transmission. Patrol advancing. Terrain stable. Signs of recent digging. That brief message would become the last confident communication from the team. 2 hours later, a garbled transmission broke through the static. Hearing movement, underground, can't locate the, and then silence. For the next 3 hours, the patrol missed all scheduled check-ins. By dusk, officers feared the worst. A relief element from 3 of 3 Marines was deployed immediately, traveling along the same ridgeline. What they discovered deepened the mystery rather than solving it. Near a fork in the spur trail, searchers found disturbed soil, as though earth had been recently shifted by hands or tools. Embedded in the loose dirt was a battered piece of the E8 field phone casing. Strangely, the damage didn't resemble bullet strikes or shrapnel. It looked crushed, as if struck repeatedly by something blunt. Alongside it lay a torn scrap of map paper bearing Kramer's handwriting. He had circled a location marked with a simple notation, "New entrance." But all footprints vanished within 20 yards. The jungle floor beyond the trail was untouched. The relief team pressed deeper, guided only by intuition. As they approached the lower slope, they encountered an unusual depression in the ground. A narrow, freshly opened seam in the earth that led to a shallow cavity, possibly a collapsed pocket of an older tunnel. Inside it, they found two objects: a broken flashlight lens and the snapped wooden stock of a rifle. Both were coated in dry soil, suggesting the collapse, if that's what it was, had occurred hours earlier. Yet there was no sign of bodies. Japanese records uncovered after the war show no mention of capturing Marines in that area on February 9. In fact, many Japanese units near Hill 700 were preparing for an assault and had not yet advanced toward the suspected tunnel complex. One Japanese lieutenant later stated that his men were instructed to avoid noisy excavation work during the daytime due to the proximity of American listening posts. If true, that makes the Marines' report of movement underground even more perplexing. Local Bougainville guides offered their own recollections. One native scout recalled hearing metallic echoes from beneath the roots of the mountain earlier that afternoon. When asked decades later what he meant, he simply replied, "Work. Digging." But no men above ground. Investigators considered multiple theories. A sudden cave-in could have swallowed part of the patrol, but not all, yet all 5 were missing. A Japanese ambush was possible, but there were no shell casings, blood trails, or drag marks. And if the patrol had panicked or become disoriented, someone would likely have fired a shot or left behind equipment apart from the few items found in the shallow depression. None of this explained the strangest clue: the footprints that seemed to end abruptly, as if the patrol had simply walked to a spot on the ridge and ceased to exist. Later analysis determined that the soil near the missing trail fork had been disturbed recently, likely within hours of the patrol arriving. Could the Marines have found a concealed tunnel entrance the Japanese later sealed? If so, their capture would have been extremely swift and silent, requiring perfect timing. Yet no Japanese engineer unit claimed such an action. To this day, historians remain divided. Some believe an undocumented tunnel collapse remains the most plausible explanation, a tragic alignment of location and timing. Others argue the patrol stumbled into an active Japanese shaft and was overpowered before they could resist. But the lack of evidence continues to cast a long shadow over the case. As American forces held Bougainville and Japan's tunnel networks grew more elaborate, the disappearance of the intelligence patrol served as a somber reminder. Beneath the island's surface lay a world invisible to the maps, one capable of swallowing even the most experienced Marines without warning. The next disappearance would occur months later, on the scorching coral ridges of Peleliu, where a Marine scout sniper team would vanish under circumstances even more confounding. By early 1945, the U.S. military was preparing for its largest amphibious assault of the Pacific War, the invasion of Okinawa. Codenamed Operation Iceberg, it required an immense coordination of Marines, soldiers, sailors, and airmen, an undertaking so vast that even small reconnaissance patrols carried extraordinary weight. Every cave, cliff, and inlet along Okinawa's shoreline held potential danger. Japanese forces had fortified the island into a massive defense in-depth system, creating a network of tunnels and hidden firing positions that dwarfed anything American forces had faced in previous campaigns. It was in this tense, uncertain atmosphere that a Marine reconnaissance patrol vanished without a trace, leaving behind perhaps the most haunting mystery of the Pacific Theater's final months. The incident occurred on March 25, 1945, just 6 days before the first waves of Marines would land on the island. The 6th Marine Division needed precise intelligence on a series of coastal caves west of the village of Yomitan. If these caves held machine gun nests or artillery observers, they could devastate the landing forces. As part of the pre-invasion reconnaissance, a 3-man patrol from the 29th Marines Reconnaissance Platoon was sent ashore during darkness to confirm whether the caves showed signs of recent activity. The team was led by Sergeant William Jack Holloway, an experienced scout known for his cool demeanor under fire. With him were Corporal Edwin Marsh, a radioman, and Private First Class Leo Tanaka, whose Okinawan heritage and fluency in Japanese were invaluable during coastal scouting missions. Their orders were straightforward: land by rubber boat under cover of night, survey 3 known cave mouths, photograph any signs of enemy presence, and return before sunrise. They launched at 1:20 from the submarine USS Jaleo, which had been temporarily tasked with covert shoreline reconnaissance. Using a two-man rubber boat modified for silent paddling, the team reached the rocky shoreline at approximately 1:55. The submarine logged a final radio check from Marsh at 2:01. Team ashore. No movement. Proceeding to cave sector. It was clear, calm, and routine. But at 2:49, a second transmission broke the stillness. It was faint and badly distorted. Hearing something deeper in the cave, hold, light inside. Static consumed the rest. For several minutes, the Jaleo attempted to re-establish contact. No further messages came through. At 3:12, the submarine recorded a brief burst of radio static, 5 seconds long, likely accidental. Then silence. Protocol dictated they wait until 4 o'clock before launching a retrieval boat. When the team failed to return by that time, the commander authorized a second rubber boat to search the landing zone. The sea was calm. The shoreline visible in moonlight. Everything seemed ideal for an extraction. Yet when the retrieval team reached the designated cove, they found no sign of the Marines. The sand showed boot impressions, 3 sets, clearly defined. They followed the footprints inland for roughly 40 yards, stopping at the base of a limestone bluff where 3 cave mouths yawned black and silent. The leftmost cave was shallow and empty. The second seemed undisturbed. But the third, where the patrol's footprints converged, was unusual. The entrance was marked by a narrow groove in the sand, as though a large object had been dragged inside. But there were no corresponding outward tracks, no signs of a struggle, no shell casings, no blood. Just the dragging mark, which ended abruptly several meters inside the cave, where the floor transitioned to solid rock. Further inside, the searchers found a single item resting on a small rock shelf, Tanaka's waterproof message tube. Inside was a half-completed sketch of the cave's interior, with one note scrawled hastily in pencil, "Movement behind us?" The handwriting ended mid-stroke. The search team ventured deeper, but encountered a sheer drop into darkness where the cave floor abruptly descended. They lowered a flashlight. The beam revealed only rough stone and stagnant water. No bodies. No gear. No torn clothing. At dawn, more Marines arrived to sweep the area. They searched every cave within half a mile. No weapons, canteens, or equipment were located. No enemy footprints or discarded cartridges. No signs of Japanese patrols. What made the disappearance even more perplexing was the later review of Japanese records. Post-war interrogations found no evidence that Japanese troops had encountered or captured any Marines on the west coast during pre-invasion reconnaissance. One Japanese officer, stationed several miles away, insisted that his unit had strict orders to remain underground and avoid engagement until the invasion began. He stated bluntly, "We did not know Americans had landed on the night you speak of." American analysts considered the possibility of a cave collapse. Okinawa's limestone formations were unpredictable, and tremors often caused sections to shift. But if the floor had collapsed beneath the Marines, why were no bodies or gear recovered later? Post-war seismic records show no significant activity that night. Another theory argued they encountered a section of the cave leading into deeper, undocumented tunnels, possibly swept in by water or dislodged rock. Yet excavation teams in 1946 and again in 1953 found nothing. The last and most debated detail comes from the radiostatic burst at 3:12. Signal specialists argued it resembled the interference caused when a transmitter strikes rock or becomes submerged. Others noted a faint rhythmic echo in the background, like someone breathing or shuffling gear in a confined space. But none of these interpretations answered the fundamental question: how does an entire patrol vanish without leaving so much as a rifle sling? The disappearance of Holloway, Marsh, and Tanaka has since become one of the most enigmatic episodes of the Pacific War's final year, a reminder that even in the most documented campaign, the lines between knowledge and mystery can blur unexpectedly. And with their loss, the strange saga of the 5 unrecovered Marine patrols reaches its final chapter, each disappearance separated by islands, months, and circumstances, yet bound together by the same haunting truth. Sometimes, in war, men vanish into the landscape, leaving behind only questions that history can't fully answer. By late 1944, the war had moved westward into the Palau Islands, where the U.S. 1st Marine Division confronted one of the most brutal battlefields of the Pacific, Peleliu. The island's jagged coral ridges, sun-scorched plateaus, and labyrinth of fortified caves turned the battlefield into a furnace of shrapnel, heat, and desperation. Even among the countless acts of valor and sacrifice, one incident remains disturbingly unresolved: the disappearance of a Marine scout-sniper duo assigned to a remote observation post in Peleliu's northern sector. Their loss is as unsettling today as it was to those who searched for them. The event occurred on October 12, 1944. Though major fighting had subsided, the northern Umurbergal ridges remained a deadly landscape of isolated skirmishes and hidden Japanese strongholds. The 1st Marine Regiment needed accurate intelligence on an enemy pocket believed to be repositioning near a series of caves known as the Horseshoe. To track these movements, Captain Andrew Carville selected 2 seasoned Marines from the regiment's Scout Sniper platoon, Sergeant Thomas Hale, an expert marksman from Oklahoma, and Lance Corporal Daniel Price, a quiet but sharp-eyed spotter with experience from earlier campaigns on Cape Gloucester. Their mission was precise: reach a coral overlook about 300 yards north of the Horseshoe, establish a concealed observation post, and monitor Japanese troop shifts at dusk. They carried only essential gear: M1903A1 sniper rifle, an M1 carbine, a compact signal lamp, camouflage netting, and a lightweight SR 536 radio. 2 hours before departure, Price meticulously checked their equipment. As one Marine later recalled, Price was the one guy you'd trust to set up a hide in a hurricane. At 1540, Hale and Price departed from Company I's lines. A runner saw them disappear behind a rocky outcrop, moving uphill with the silent precision characteristic of scout sniper teams. At 1725, they sent a brief radio message: "In position. Good visibility. Will observe through nightfall." The transmission was clear, calm, professional. Nothing suggested distress. But at 1802, a second message arrived. Shorter. More strained. Possible movement, East Ridge, shifting to. Static swallowed the rest. Operators tried repeatedly to raise them. No reply. Initially, officers assumed radio interference. Poliliu's ridges often blocked signals, and the Japanese were known to use scrambling techniques, rudimentary but sometimes effective. But when Hale and Price failed to return at dawn, search efforts began immediately. A squad from Company I traced the scouts' approach route. The coral ridge was sharp enough to slice boots, and dust clouds kicked up with every footstep. But the search team found something strange. The scouts' initial trail was clear for 50 yards and then vanished. No footprints. No drag marks. No scuffing where camouflaged Marines might have crawled. Just jagged coral, untouched. Reaching the intended observation point, searchers found the hide exactly as Hale and Price had prepared it. Camouflage netting draped over a shallow recess, an empty canteen, 2 ration wrappers, and a single strip of lens cloth weighted neatly under a stone. But something was missing: both weapons, all ammunition, and both Marines. The area showed no signs of struggle. No shell casings. No blood. No grenade impacts. The coral dust around the hide was undisturbed. It was as if the men had stood up, walked out, and disappeared into the burning quiet. At the base of the ridge, searchers discovered a more perplexing clue: a 20-foot drop into a narrow coral trench. In the trench they found a single item, Price's spotting scope, its glass uncracked, resting gently on the ground. The placement made no sense. If dropped, it would have shattered. If thrown, it would have bounced and broken. Someone, Price or another individual, had placed it there carefully. Marine engineers examined the trench walls for signs of recent passage. None were found. As the search expanded, attention turned to potential Japanese involvement. Poliliu still harbored over 1,000 entrenched Japanese defenders, many trained for silent infiltration. Maybe an enemy patrol came upon the hide, overwhelmed the Marines, and carried their bodies into one of the many caves. But post-war interrogation of surviving Japanese officers revealed no record of captured or killed scout snipers. One officer from the 2nd Battalion, 346th Infantry, stated with certainty, "We did not attack positions that night. We stayed underground." Another theory emerged: heat exhaustion. October temperatures on Poliliu topped 115 degrees. Perhaps the Marines became disoriented. But this theory faltered when considering their experience and the careful arrangement of the untouched hide. Besides, if they had staggered off due to heat, they would have left footprints. They did not. The last and most debated detail came from the final radio transmission. Analysts noted faint background sound, rhythmic tapping. Some thought it was interference. Others believed it resembled tools striking rock, unexpectedly close for an observation post far from known Japanese tunnel mouths. Could Hale and Price have discovered a new cave entrance? Could they have moved to investigate? Or were they detecting something underground before vanishing? None of these questions ever found conclusive answers. What remains is a stark fact. 2 highly skilled Marines vanished in broad daylight on an island barely 8 square miles in size. Their disappearance shook the scout sniper platoon, already battered by the campaign's extreme heat and casualties. As one Marine later wrote, Peleliu took men in open battle. But Hale and Price, the island just swallowed them. The mystery of their fate would echo into 1945, when another reconnaissance patrol on the eve of the Okinawa landings would disappear under even more enigmatic circumstances.